Hi everyone. Thank you once again for taking the time to join us as we kick off with our lessons for this year. And of course, starting off with helping you navigate your January without loan sharks and focusing a little bit more on loan sharks, what they are, and how to help you stay away from them. As normal, I'm going to be switching off my camera and then focusing on the lesson ahead. So, all the best and enjoy it as we kick off our financial lessons for this year. Right, let me just share my screen. Here we go. And here we go. Alrighty. As we start, awesome. Today, please. Okay. So, navigating your Januworry, right, without loan sharks. Okay, firstly, let's just look at what loan sharks are. So, of course, yes, loan sharks are informal, often illegal lenders who offer quick loans at extremely high interest rates, often bypassing formal regulations and consumer protections, right? I think for me, this is very important, right? This part of the sentence, bypassing formal regulations and consumer protection, right? So yes, the high extreme interest rate is one of the negative parts about lending money from the borrowing money from these type of lenders, right? And then if you find yourself in that situation, of course, by bypassing formal regulations and consumer protection, it means that these lenders do not subscribe to your normal National Credit Act, nor are they governed by the National Credit Regulator, right? So then it puts your finances and yourself at risk, because if you find yourself in a situation now that you're in a sticky situation, maybe these individuals or this particular organization is using unconventional methods to try and get the funds back, threatening you and trying to actually put you at harm's way and so forth, then you can't go to the National Credit Act, basically, because they're not governed by the National Credit Act. You'll then have to probably go to the police station and so forth and just open another a case, of like a criminal case of sort, against them. But you would not be able to get assistance from the National Credit Act nor the National Credit Regulator in this instance, because they are not governed and because their actions are illegal, right? So you would be putting yourself at risk by actually going and borrowing money from them. Okay, so just to look at 5 ways to identify a loan shark, because sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you could be looking at borrowing money from a particular financial institution, and you are not aware that this financial institution is actually a loan shark, because some of these institutions don't actually advertise themselves as loan sharks, right? Because people hear loan shark and they're like, oh no, this person's going to break my leg if I don't pay them back, right? So what they would tend to do actually would be able to actually front and what to use the terminology to make it seem as if they are a legitimate business, but unfortunately they're not. And in the instances where you are not able to actually identify if that or tell the difference between a loan shark and a proper financial institution, then we need to look at these 5 things that can help you be able to identify, right? So firstly, there's always no formal documentation or contracts when it comes to loan sharks. The National Credit Act requires, financial institutions or the lenders to be able to have some form of documentation to actually stipulate the terms of that particular agreement. So that's already red flag number one. If there's no contract, there's no form of documentation, that's a first way for you to be able to identify that this is actually a loan shark, right? Because how are they going to be able to keep record of the money that they've borrowed you, the terms of that loan, and so forth, right? Because there's so many nitty-gritties that are covered in a contract that you received from financial institution, especially when you are borrowing money, right? So another one is that there's no credit checks. So of course, when you walk into a final financial institution, normal financial institution that actually is governed by the National Credit Act and the National Credit Regulator, they do a credit check, right? So they'll normally pull your credit check using your ID number on the credit bureau to just see what is your credit status. Are you a bad debtor? Meaning that you don't pay your debt on time? Do you have judgments against your name? Do you have any accounts that are currently in arrears and so forth, right? So all of that information is actually found on the credit bureau. So that's another red flag. Number two, if a person says to you, okay, I'll borrow your money, they don't do any credit checks, they don't have any formal documentation, that's already a red flag, right? Because sometimes you, like I'm saying, some of these institutions, they won't say they're loan sharks, but maybe they can have a contract with you, but they don't do a credit check. So, what type of financial institution doesn't do a credit check? Because they need to be able to protect themselves against risks of having to borrow money, having to lend money to people who are bad debtors, right? So that is the purpose of the credit check, to try and protect the financial institution from bad debtors. So if they don't do a credit check, then that's already a red flag. Okay. Another one is that they could have very short repayment terms. So, like in normal financial institution that normally have payment terms, I think up to 72 months, which is about 6 years. So, these type of institutions don't offer such favorable repayment terms, right? They would normally ask you to pay back the loan maybe in the next 3 months or 6 months max, right? And the other thing is that they have extremely high interest rates. Okay. So that is another thing that people actually don't take note of, because at that point in time, you're desperate, right? And you're not thinking about the interest rate, and you're not thinking about the financial impact of having this type of credit under your name. You just need the money available to you now, right? Another thing is that immediate access to cash, but with coercion, with coercive agreements. So like I said, that normally people would hear the word loan shark and be like, oh no, this person's going to break my leg. They're going to do something extreme to try and get their funds back. So some of these institutions won't advertise themselves as loan sharks. They would try and advertise themselves as easy ways to get credit. So they'll always use these nice terms to actually entice people to come and borrow money from them. And then when you get there and now they've given you the money, then they'll have all these different terms, right? For them to be able to get easy access to the money that they've borrowed you, all right? So some of the tactics that they would do, they'd confiscate your ID book, bank card as security, so that in situations where people are failing to pay, then they know that they can have the bank card to be able to withdraw the money directly for themselves. Or they confiscate your ID book, so that, because I mean, people rely a lot on their ID books. You need your ID book when you go to the bank. So, as a form of identification, they would need your ID book. There's so many other reasons that an ID book is, of course, important, because it's proof of your identity as an individual, so that we can be able to recognize who you are and so forth. So, confiscating that type of document is also a very important thing for them to do, to try and actually coerce people to be able to pay the funds that they are owing them, right? So have a look out for these type of instances when it comes to these typical financial institutions that claim to be proper financial institutions, and to actually find that they are loan sharks, because that is exactly what we need to be able to stay away from, right? And then, of course, the signs of illegal lending, right? So, firstly, there will be no affiliation with the National Credit Regulator. So, I'm not sure if you guys noticed this. So, if you normally walk into a bank, they would have their NCA and the NCR certificates actually put somewhere around the bank, because it needs to be visible for people to be able to see that this organization is governed by the National Credit Regulator. They also abide by the National Credit Act. So the certificates and documentation to try and actually make people aware and give them assurance that this organization is governed by the National Credit Act and the National Credit Regulator, right? So that's the first thing you would be able to see. If you walk into that establishment and you don't see any form of documentation lying around or put up on the walls somewhere, then you know that, okay, this organization is not actually does not abide by the National Credit Act and is not governed by the National Credit Regulator, because according to the National Credit Regulator, you need to have that certificate somewhere within that establishment so that people can see, right? So the fact that it's non-existent, that's already a red flag. Okay, because for them not having it there already, it's actually against the policy, right? The policy within the National Credit Act. So it's important to have that document there or that certificate somewhere on the wall within the establishment to try and prove that you are affiliated with the National Credit Regulator, right? Secondly, okay, of course, charging, the maximum interest rate. Of course, if you didn't know this, but excuse me, currently the interest rate is capped about 27.5% annually by the South African law, which of course is the National Credit Act. So if you are getting charged more than this, then you already know that you are actually being duped in some way, because this is against the regulation, right? And then, of course, threatening legal or physical harm if payments are missed. Okay, so that's another thing. We mentioned it earlier, where we say that they use some form of coercion and to try and get the funds back. Another thing is them confiscating legal documents like your bank cards, your ID documents, to try and make sure that people pay the funds back. Okay, so these are all the signs of illegal lending, or top of the five ways to identify. So just keep an eye out, especially when you walk into any of these financial institutions that promise you to give you funds, especially now because it's January. People are desperate to get money to pay for school fees. They want to be able to actually start off the year with certain things that they need to do financially. And unfortunately, because maybe they could be declined at at the accredited financial institutions, your normal banks, then people would then think that, okay, the unconventional ways of getting money, they would go to all of these financial institutions that you now find popping up everywhere, right? Because that's the thing. You can walk in some of them. I'm not going to mention the names, but like I said, if you look at these tips as to how to identify if it's a loan shark or not, you'll kind of see that actually that financial institution is trying to present itself like a reputable bank or a reputable financial institution, whereas it's actually a loan shark. So just keep an eye out on that. Okay. And then why loan sharks are a risk. Okay, so firstly, guys, it's unregulated. Ideally, it's like people who drive without a license. They're a risk on the road because if anything happens, what are you going to do, right? I mean, think of it in this manner. If you get into a car accident, God forbid, and you find out that the individual has no insurance, they don't have a license, right? So it just makes it a very sticky situation, okay? So the same applies when it comes to borrowing money from unaccredited, unregulated people, right? Because these people don't comply to the National Credit Act. They are not governed by the National Credit Regulator. So you don't have much to do or say in a situation where a person now is trying to get the funds back from you, and you don't know how to get any assistance if these people are threatening your life. It kind of puts you in that situation where you don't know what to do, because they don't use the conventional methods of getting the money back, which is debiting your account, listing you on credit bureau if you're missing payments, and so forth, right? Because they don't abide by the National Credit Regulator nor the National Credit Act. Okay. So here's another thing, of course, high interest rates, right? That's another thing, overcharging people when it comes to interest rates. And that's how loan sharks make their money. They just trap you in this debt that you can't get yourself out of, right? And in a lot of situations, you find that people tend to have to go borrow money from banks to try and pay off loan sharks, right? So you don't want to be in that kind of situation where you're borrowing from Tim to pay Tom, right? So just stay away from loan sharks as much as possible, or as best as you can, so that you don't find yourself in those kind of situations. And another one is the lack of legal resources, right? So since loan sharks, like I said, they operate outside the laws. So right, so people who borrow money from them, they don't have much of formal recourse if things go wrong. So look at it from this point of view. You went to a person and borrowed money, right? Or went to an institution that is a loan shark to borrow money. This person now takes your car. Okay. They take your car as leverage to say that if you don't pay me back, I'm going to sell your car. So now try going to the police station to try and explain your situation, okay? Because firstly, you went to a illegal establishment, borrowed money from them, right? So of course, you already playing fast and loose a bit with the law, right? By actually going to these loan sharks. So it just puts you in that situation, and now you're trying to build a case against a person who's running an illegal establishment, and yet you knew they were running an illegal establishment, but you then willingly went there and borrowed money. You see how it does not actually put you in a good light, and trying to actually recoup your resources, or for example, your car in this instance, would make things a bit of a challenge, right? So that is why, it's not advisable for people to actually go to loan sharks to actually borrow money of any sort. Okay. And then, of course, the social and economic impact. People tend to actually they are stuck in perpetual debt because of loan sharks. Like I said, borrowing money from a loan shark, you then meet people who would have to go and borrow money from other people, or they'll have to go borrow money maybe from a bank or any other financial institution to try and pay off a loan shark, right? I've dealt with people who've been in those kind of situations, and it really isn't nice, guys, because at the end of the day, you're getting threatening messages, emails, phone calls from these people who are trying to get their money back from you. And remember the high interest rate. So just because they are calling you and messaging you and just harassing you, right? Basically, it does not mean that they're going to stop charging you interest. They still charge you this exorbitant interest that they charge. So while you're still sitting trying to figure out how you're going to pay this debt, that debt is still accumulating interest, right? So you are then stuck in this black hole of debt. So it just contributes to the cycle of poverty and financial stress within the communities, because people then take the SASSA cards, as something I've actually read about, where they take their SASSA cards and leave it at the loan sharks as leverage, right? Because think about it, if a person is getting like 350 rand, right, for argument's sake, as a grant money, they get that 350 rand per month as grant. How are you borrowing that person 2,000 rand? I'm just giving you an example. How will a person who's currently earning 350 rand, right, is going to pay for a loan of 2,000 rand, right? Already you are being set up for failure. And that's the purpose. That's basically the argument behind, the negative impact of loan sharks, because now you find yourself in that situation where you've borrowed the money and now you can't pay it back, because initially when you were borrowed the money, you couldn't pay it back anyway. And when it comes to the National Credit Act, and this is why they're not governed and they don't meet the requirements to be governed by the National Credit Regulator, it's because the National Credit Act states that financial institutions should not put consumers at a worse off financial position, meaning they also are not meant to be practicing reckless lending, because that's the true definition of reckless lending. How can I borrow you money when I can see that you do not have the financial capacity to pay me back? And that is just what reckless lending means. And it also means that I shouldn't put you in a worse off financial situation when you walked in. So basically, if you walk into my establishment, when you walk out, I should not have put you in a worse off situation. So those are the kind of things that the National Credit Act actually has stipulated on the act itself, and the regulator governs such practices. So that is why loan sharks don't meet the requirements to even be part of, find a proper or regulated financial institutions, because they don't actually follow those type of policies, right? Secondly, it erodes, disposable income. Like I said, you find people borrowing money to be able to go pay off their loan sharks, because now the loan shark is popping up at work, right? Can you imagine how random that is? You walk in, now there's this person coming in looking for you at work, saying that you borrowed money and you're not paying them back. Your reputation, like the stress behind it all is just, oh, it's so consuming, guys. So this is why it's not a good idea. I mean, if you think of it, no bank is going to send people at your work to say that you need to pay them back, right? Normally, they would use the proper channels, which are based on what the National Credit Act says, which would say that they would send you letters first, failing letters, then they'll send you warnings regarding your lack of payment, and then if you don't pay, then they would probably list you on credit bureau and so forth, right? But they're not going to just rock up at your workplace, or they're not going to just take your car. They're not going to, they're not going to actually make your life difficult, okay? Because, like I said, the National Credit Act does say that financial institutions should not put you in a worse off situation. So, unfortunately, when you go to these unscrupulous institutions that are loan sharks or fall within the confines of being called loan sharks, right? Then you just put yourself at risk, right? Because your disposable income is always going to be diminished, because these people are always trying to eat into, the money that you're trying to save. Because, like I said, the interest rates are so high, then it's not easy, to pay back. Because think about it from the example I was saying earlier. If you are getting a 350 Rand, grant every month, and you are meant to pay back a 2,000 Rand loan, how are you going to afford, right? You need to pay this loan back in the next 3 months. I can't even imagine how much that repayment would be, and how much that interest would be in terms of the impact. So now what tends to happen, people then go borrow money from others to try and pay back the loans that they've taken from loan sharks, right? Especially purely because of safety and risk behind not paying them back. Okay. So just right to just finalize this point, right? It hinders economic growth. So of course, think of it in this manner, guys. If you have a you're getting paid this 350 Rand a month, and you've taken a loan of 2,000 Rand, okay? So how are you going to pay it back? What ends up happening, you borrow money from other people to try and actually pay back this loan. So it means you borrowing money from siblings, right? You are putting them at a bad financial position to try and pay a loan that you took out from a loan shark, right? So then it just hinders, growth, right? Not just for yourself, but the people around you that now have to try and help you get yourself out of this financial situation, right? And so this is one of the reasons, that loan sharks have a horrible impact when it comes to social and economic impact, right? Because of the way they conduct their business, and then generally how it then impacts the people that actually tend to borrow money from them, and unfortunately find themselves in this financial debt trap. Okay, and then how to stay away from loan sharks, right? I know it sounds very enticing sometimes, because there's so many benefits when you are desperate, because they don't do credit checks. They'll give you the money immediately. They're not going to give you these long waiting hours and so forth that you'd normally go through when you go to a bank. So then people tend to be able to say that actually going to a loan shark is easier, but look at the negative impact behind it, guys. At the end of the day, the high interest rates, it's just not worth it, because you find yourself in that hole, and trying to dig yourself out is really not going to work, right? So we're doing things differently this year. So let's try and see how we can be able to do our level best to stay away from loan sharks. So firstly, of course, budget is my favorite word. It's creating a budget, and will help you live within your means, because sometimes, yes, I understand that there are situations where people find themselves where they need money for emergencies and so forth. However, when you have a budget in place, it kind of gives you a great understanding of how much you have, right, in the bank that is available for you to be able to spend, firstly. Secondly, having to plan your finances better, right? You can only do that if you have a budget, right? So you were able to be able to see that this is the amount of money I have. This is how I can spend this amount of money. And if I don't have that money, then I can't do what I would want to do, right? I know this is a very tricky situation, and a lot of people frown upon me saying this, but guys, we need to get out of the habit of putting ourselves in a financial situation just to please others, right? I know that there's certain things that happen in life that require us to be able to contribute to finances and so forth, but we cannot expect, family members, friends to borrow money just to be able to contribute to maybe someone's funeral, someone's wedding, someone's whatever that needs to be contributed towards, because basically you are putting that person in a bad financial position just for them to be able to contribute to this particular thing or event at that point in time, right? So budgeting is important because that way you're able to see that I can afford this, I can't afford this, and communicate. If you can't afford it, then let people know that, guys, I won't be able to contribute to this because I don't have the finances to do so, right? And if people are still forcing you to say that find the money somewhere, yeah, those people are people that you need to get out of your life, basically, because they're willing to sacrifice your financial well-being, your mental well-being, emotional well-being, right? And you're just your well-being as an individual just for a particular event or situation at that point in time, right? Which means there's no love there, right? Another one is reduce unnecessary expenses. Okay. So reducing unnecessary expenses, guys, is important because if you find that when you've done your budget, right, and you find that there are expenses that you're paying for that you shouldn't, okay, you're spending 500 Rand every month, right, every week, for example, spending 500 Rand every week on alcohol, right, and you can't afford it. So it's like 2 grand a month. So now if you're looking at it and you're saying, actually, my budget actually indicates that I'm spending 2,000 Rand on alcohol every single month, that's about what? How much? It's 24,000 Rand a year, right? Which is ridiculous, guys. So those are the kind of things that having a budget actually indicates, because when you have your budget put in place, then it's going to show you where you are spending money unnecessarily when it comes to expenses. Okay. Then, of course, saving towards an emergency fund, because a lot of people find themselves in financial situations, right, where they go to loan sharks because of emergencies, right? I've yet to hear someone who borrowed money just to go on holiday, right? I don't think people would put themselves in that situation, because it's not that people don't know that loan sharks are not good, but I think it's just because out of desperation at that point in time, then people then find it as the only option because they don't have any other options, because maybe they've got bad credit records and they can't get money from your conventional banks, right? So saving towards an emergency fund will help you, put yourself in a situation where you are trying to have an emergency fund for situations where you need money. Okay, it's important, guys, because life happens. Okay, and when life happens, you don't want to be a person who is unprepared, right, for situations that you could have adequately prepared for, right? This comes into topic, for example, when I talk about why, when people would ask, like, why don't you have kids as yet? And I'd say that, guys, because I'm not financially ready to have kids. At the end of the day, you want to be able to provide for this particular human, and you need to be comfortable as well as an individual, right? Because I don't want to have to sacrifice the way I live just because now I've got kids in terms of finances. So that is why it's important to me to make sure that I'm in a good financial position to be able to make certain decisions in life. So an emergency fund helps you because it's like a cushion in a situation where you fall in a situation of emergency. Falling in this instance would be the emergency. Then that cushion, right, in terms of the extra money you have saved up, helps you in that situation, and that helps you stay away from loan sharks. Okay. Then, of course, finding other income opportunities, right? I mean, guys, the economy is tough all over. So everybody is having a tough time. So it's best to be able to find ways to be able to make other means of income. So opportunities that you might have to look into to be able to actually make additional income, so that it can help in situations for that you can be able to save that money. So, for example, if you're make it, you start a side hustle just basically so that you can be able to um, have additional income, and that additional income is what you use to save towards your emergency fund, then that is awesome, because at the end of the day, you know that you're not taking away from what you currently have, you're making more to save, right? Because sometimes when I talk to people, they'll say, I can't afford to save because I don't have enough money. And like I said, maybe going through your budget and cutting out unnecessary expenses then will open up your budget a little bit so that you can be able to save. But another way for you to be able to make an emergency fund is that you can be able to actually find other opportunities to just generate more additional income, right? And then, of course, seeking professional advice, guys, it's important, right? If you find yourself in a situation where you say, I can't cope financially, that's why we're here, because we want to be able to educate, help you guys to be able to get yourselves out of these sticky situations, all right? Having conversations with qualified people who deal with money helps you see things in a different light. And it's always best to have a conversation with a person outside of the situation, because they tend to be a bit more objective. All right. It's not going to make sense for you, for example, to go and have a conversation with a family member and you are having financial problems because you had to borrow money to help with a family matter. For example, you had to borrow money because someone is getting married, or you had to borrow money to contribute to a funeral, a wedding, or any whatever event that was happening within the family. So it's not going to make any sense for you to be able to put yourself in that situation, right? And then, of course, now that you've borrowed the money and now you're in a bad financial situation, then you're seeking advice from the people who put you in that situation. You see, it doesn't make sense, right? So you'd rather get someone outside who's going to be able to be more objective to tell you, to say that actually you were wasting money here. Because when you're speaking to someone from the outside, it actually helps put things in perspective, because we tend to be a bit more objective when we're looking at your bank statements and questioning you about what you're spending your money on, right? Then, of course, education is key, guys. Having to be able to educate yourself, equip yourself with the skills, the knowledge, right, around credit and different ways of credit. And I did this class last year, guys. I did 3 lessons last year regarding, understanding debt and the different types of debt, to try and help people understand when and how to use debt, to their advantage. So just go to our YouTube channel and be able to actually catch up on debt management. So that way you can be able to be well equipped with what debt is, how to manage it better, and then you're able to actually put yourself in a better financial position, right? And then the alternatives to loan sharks, right? So there's different alternatives. Okay, firstly, I would say that consolidation loans are sometimes things people don't take into consideration, because they think to themselves, oh, I'm already a bad debtor. This bank is not going to borrow me money. However, if you tend to actually go to a bank and say, I need a consolidation loan. And what I love about the consolidation loan is that they don't pay the funds into your bank account because they can't trust you, right? So instead, they're going to actually pay the money into the account of those creditors you're owing. Okay, so if you want to pay off a clothing account, a loan shark, and so forth, then you're able to actually pay. They will pay those creditors directly, and then that also reduces the stress of you from you in a situation where you can't trust yourself with the money anymore, right? And that's why I advocate for consolidation loans, because it's cheaper and it's easier, right? When you are dealing with one specific debt than having 5 different types of loans that you're paying, because each one has its own interest rate, it has service fees and so forth. Whereas if you consolidate it, you then have to deal with one institution and you have one interest rate and you're paying one service fee, which does tend to actually translate to be a bit more cheaper than you having 5 or 6 different loans, right, from different financial institutions. Okay. And then for individuals that normally who currently have, who meet the requirements to actually get grants, then SASSA does have a social relief of distress, right? They have this program to try and help people in financial stress, to help them get themselves out of these sticky situations. So that's a program that you can be able to actually go to the SASSA website and read up more about if you feel that this is something that could assist you in this kind of situation. And then the third one, of course, is a stokvel, right? Because if you're not able to save money in the conventional way, opening a bank account, transferring the money, or having the money a stop order done and the money debited directly from your bank account into that investment account, then a stokvel is the best way to go, because at the end of the day, you have these group of people who will be saving money every month, and you have that one person who's probably going to be managing the stokvel, who's always going to be calling and reminding you that, hey, you need to pay your money or your contribution and so forth. So then it just does give you a bit of more accountability, right? And have someone who holds you accountable when it comes to your contributions. And that does help, right? Because I know people do stokvels I heard stokvels in December because they want to buy groceries. They need money for December. I liked ideas that I was reading about where people were talking about starting stokvels for January, school fees, right? Which is smart because, I mean, if you know that you need to pay a large sum of money towards tuition fees, then having a stokvel that pays you your lump sum in January will definitely help, because at the end of the day, then in that instance, you're able to actually have the money that you need for January. The other idea was having a stokvel for example, school uniforms, right? Was another one I heard about, which was also another fun idea because a lot of parents complain about the school uniform. Another one was, I think it was stationery, because stationery is a hot topic, especially when schools open. Stationery and uniform, quite expensive. So starting a stokvel to actually save up towards that. I mean, you can get a payout in January and maybe have another payout in June, because now you're preparing for winter and pencils and things get lost during the first 6 months of the year, of course. So then maybe you need to top up with the stationery in halfway through the year. So maybe getting another little lump sum payout in June is not a bad idea, to try and carry and get stationery to carry your kids to the last two terms of the year, right? So these are all the different ways that you could possibly save towards, money, and try your utmost best, staying away from the loan sharks, right? And of course, as normal, you can contact us on, of course, email. You can go out to our website, on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, right, on Facebook as well. So please try your level best, of course, to stay away from these loan sharks. And please let us continue studying and learning together to make sure that we make good financial decisions this year. Thank you for your time. Bye.